Buenas noches. Oh, not many Spanish speakers out there. How about Sabato and Jema? Happy Sabbath? Anybody? Oh, we have a couple of people. Okay, all right, welcome. Good to have you all this evening. Sorry if I'm looking really dressed down. I literally got here as quick as I could from a swim meet over in Angels Camp. A couple of our kids were, not my kids, our youth were swimming today, so had a pretty big meet. So we got to go down and hang out with them for a little bit. So let's go ahead and do some questions, shall we?
Oh, yeah, go for it. Did you have siblings growing up? Were you more on the same team or rivals? Who had siblings? How did it go? Okay.
Always same team for Pat. What about the rest of you? 50-50? Depending on what day of the week it was, right? Oh. Okay. So she said that sometimes she was with one, then sometimes with the other. I was that way too with my siblings. I was the youngest of three. My brother is 11 years older than me, so if you can imagine, by the time he was in high school, I was just a little twerp. But he and I would gang up on our sister who's in the middle. And so, you know, I had big brother to help gang up on sister. But anyway, what sauce or condiment or dressing couldn't you live without? Hot sauce. All right, what about the rest of you? Anybody have a go-to? Ranch dressing. All right, I love that. Yeah. Anybody else? And mayonnaise, all right. Soy sauce. Oh, that's, yeah, good. Anybody have like some obscure condiment that you use on everything? I've got a couple of those at home. All right.
What was your favorite house growing up? That's the question. What was your favorite house growing up?
Well, let's skip that one. Let's go to the next one because I have no idea what that's asking. Well, all right.
Me neither.
Do number 4.
So, number 4, did you have a nickname growing up? Did you like it?
Nicknames.
While you think, I will share that I grew up with the nickname Toti. All my family calls me Toti until today. And I usually introduce myself as Toti. But yeah, most of the people who knows me from since I was little, that's my nickname.
Did you like it?
Yeah, totally. Yes.
Was what? Bebo? Okay. Bebo means big brother. All right. Some of you might not want to reveal your nicknames because we're going to start calling you these funny nicknames. Damon, what about you? Dino.
Okay.
All right. That's funny. Have nothing to do with the Flintstones either. Anybody else out there? Favorite nickname growing up? And whether or not, did you like it? No? Nobody had any? Yeah, I had a lot of different versions of Ty something. Mickey? Oh, so Mickey is your nickname. So how many, yeah, I'd be interested to know, how many of you, the regular name that everybody calls you is your nickname? We have a few? Okay, all right. I didn't know that. We'll have to get down to the bottom of what your real names are. I know, right? We'll just have to look it up in the church membership logs or something. We'll have your official names there. All right, what's the best present someone could bring to your housewarming party? If you had a housewarming party, what would be the best present in your opinion? Firewood, all right.
Amen.
What was it? I heard I heard a crock pot, somebody. Salsa, all right. Richie? Cold cash. All right, that's a good one. I don't think we can top that one, Rich.
Have you ever successfully conquered a fear? Fear.
Roller coasters. I used to be deathly afraid of roller coasters. You couldn't even get me on one. We went to Disney one time, and this was in Florida. I was just a kid, and my whole family got in this long line to go on to Space Mountain, and I cried the entire time, begging not to go, until we got down to the ones who were going to get on, and my mom finally said to my dad, "I'll just stay out with him. You go with the other kids." And I didn't go on it.
There you go.
It took about 10 more years, and then I finally got into roller coasters at SeaWorld. But anyway, neither here nor there. Anybody else successfully conquered a fear? Damon. Oh, claustrophobia, and you did it by scuba diving. Okay. Anybody else? Swimming. Just in general, swimming. Oh, yeah. Deep water still scares me. But anyway, anybody else? Good. Jumping off the high dive. Are you afraid of heights or afraid of deep water too? Maybe a little bit of both. Oh man, you live in the wrong community. There's no guardrails around here. Yeah, no, that's scary too. I tried taking pre-grade at night and there's no guardrails. You're like, oh. Anybody else? Phobias? Yeah, that is scary. So John said parasailing, and when you were in, what were you in? Navigator training, they'd let you go and let the rope go, and you have to figure out how to get down yourself. That would be terrifying. I would be scared too. All right, what's the next one?
Isn't it your turn?
Oh, is it my turn? Oh, I don't know. I've lost track. Have you ever gone way out of your comfort zone? Tell us about it. Gone way out. It's kind of similar to the last question, but not necessarily a fear. Anybody gone way outside of their comfort zone before? You got one? Oh yeah, I'm looking at you. Preached. All right. How many of you preaching a sermon would be way outside of your comfort zone? What? Oh man. All right. Well, got the wrong crowd here to collect some preachers, Pastor Jim. Anybody else way outside of your comfort zone? Have you been, had to step outside of your comfort zone? What was it like? What did you do? Yes. Speech class, all right. That is amongst public speaking is amongst the highest. All right, fears out there. All right, let's do one more.
What is your favorite habit? Eating. Something else?
Oh, sourdough baking. You're one of
Okay.
those. Okay, all right. Anybody on this side, favorite habit? Not all habits are bad, by the way. There's good habits. Swen, what about you? You got any habits? What's your favorite? All right, dreaming of the days you rode motorcycles. All right. Well, hey, thank you guys so much. Let's start with a word of prayer, shall we? Father God, thank you so much for bringing us together on this Friday evening. And as we hear the topic for tonight, what an important message about how to deal with conflict. Each and every one of us has been there. We've struggled with conflict, whether it's with friends or family, our spouses, our children, maybe even our grandchildren, people in the church, people at work. There's so many pitfalls to dealing with relationships that we've been talking about all week, and oftentimes it ends with conflict. And so, Father, help us, Lord, to know how to navigate. Help us to understand what Pastor Jim is going to be presenting. Help us to be clear, and help us to walk away with a renewed sense of understanding and purpose and wisdom. In Jesus' name, amen.
They're really simple principles in conflict management, and they have to go around the golden rule of how we connect with each other. Some would have it, do unto others before they do unto you, as kind of the golden principle of how they should achieve and work on it, when actually Matthew 7:12 says, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Conflict is inevitable. Conflict is inevitable. Sometimes we spend all of our time trying to avoid conflict, when actually conflict can be a thing that brings us closer when it's handled correctly. The golden rule setting of do unto others as you'd have them do unto you has a background in Matthew, the 7th chapter. As it's going through, it says, what father would take his son's request for bread and give him a stone instead? And then it says, what father would take a son's desire for lunch and give him, instead of the fish, a snake? Then he asks, so why do you think that your heavenly Father wouldn't give good things to those who ask from him? Relationship is a key point to dealing with conflict. If you would, the first rule is probably the most important and part that we separate, and that we need to separate the relationship and the issue. Because when we try to deal with them at the same time, we have the emotional part that's going on, and we don't look at the issue in the same way. Because we're trying to process both simultaneously, we often end up processing neither of them, not restoring the relationship and not dealing with the issue. So looking at that relationship as the first thing, the deep love of the Father prevents him from treating his son unkindly. So if we start with the relationship and restore the relationship, the conflict can move away. So the first step is to what? Separate the issue and the relationship, the problem and the relationship, to separate them. And then we first deal with the relationship. If we have the opportunity, if we have the time, we first deal with the relationship, and then we handle the issue or problem. So here's how we deal with that relationship. And if you're looking at your page, trying to follow along, we're on this side of the page, on the very top column. We'll give you the direction that we're walking through right this moment. So to restore relationship, we do it just in the same way we would if a child were coming to us and fell and stumbled and tore their knee or had a problem with a fall. We do the same process for dealing with a broken relationship. The first thing we do when the child comes and they're crying because they've scraped their knee, we sympathize with them. I need to first understand before I can seek to be understood. Before anything else can happen, before I can build a relationship and a connection with you, before I can deal with the problem, I need to know that you understand me, that you recognize the problem that I'm dealing with. And so listening is a huge part of that, sharing what happened, how it hurt, where they're going through. Proverbs says, listen before you answer. If you don't, you're being stupid and insulting. That's the Good News translation. If you look at it, it's pretty clear saying, listen, if you don't take the time to get input from somebody else, it's very hard to reach a consensus. The first step then is, the step in the process is sympathizing with them, listening to the issues that are. The second is we clean. Think of it again. First, we listen, we hear their problem, and then we go and we clean the wound. If you're talking about how that fits in this process, cleaning the wound is to say, that somebody comes and says, you hurt my feelings, right? That's listening. You hurt my feelings. And hopefully they'll tell you what you did that hurt their feelings. We'll come back to that in a bit. But so they share with you, hurt your feelings. So the first thing you do is clean the wound. That is, you confess your sins to one another and pray for one another that you may be healed. The prayer of a righteous person has great power in working. That is, you apologize. Now, it may not be that what you did was intentional. It may not be that what you did was intentional. But this isn't the time to sort through, well, I didn't say anything too bad, I just said. Instead, it's a way of saying, I'm sorry that what I did hurt you. If we love somebody, if we care about them, aren't we always sorry that they were hurt by what we did? even if it was unintentional. I see a lot of blank faces out there. You guys aren't sorry when it doesn't bother you. When somebody's hurt and you've hurt somebody, isn't it right to say, I'm sorry that my action hurt you, even if it wasn't intentional? I like what Ben Franklin said. It says, never ruin an apology with an excuse. Never ruin an apology with an excuse. Because what you're doing is you're stepping in and saying, there was a reason why I hurt you, and it's really, that's more important than seeing to you. But in doing that, what you're doing is trying to work on the issue rather than work on the relationship. We restore the relationship first and then deal with the issue. We affirm. We affirm that they've been hurt. We affirm that something's damaged them. You know how important it is to do that rather than to step out and attack in another way? Sometimes in conflict, we do just the opposite. We say, well, if you don't like it, I'm out of here. Or I'm not going to deal with you anymore if you keep working like that. Threatening divorce, any of that's just the opposite. It gives insecurity in the relationship. I love this cartoon because here you see they're obviously fighting, but he still has the umbrella over the top of her because he still cares about her even though he's angry at her. I'm here and we'll get through this. Love is caring for each other even when you're angry. It's an ability to say, I don't want you hurt even though I'm mad at you for what you did. We cover and protect. So first we sympathized with the child who scratched their knee, and then we come and we clean the wound, and then we cover and protect. We put a bandage on it, right? When we cover and protect for somebody else, what we're telling them, how we do that is we say, I'm going to protect you from it happening again for me. And by doing that, it could say, I'm sorry, I will never intentionally do that again. Or, I'm sorry, I'll really try to watch how I respond to you so that it doesn't come through in the same way. By sharing with them that your intention is to not hurt them again, you are covering the wound by saying there's safety in our presence. There's opportunity for you to have strength and have trust in me because I'm committing to not carry through in the same way with this action. And sometimes after that happens, there has to be a little time to let healing occur. Now, sometimes that's a little time, and depending on how deep the hurt is, sometimes it's a longer time. I was walking with a family through this picture, and for them it was a huge hurt. The husband had been unfaithful in the process, and they were working on how to deal with this whole thing, and he was feeling really good because he'd come and confessed to her and feeling like he'd gotten this whole thing off of his chest. She was in the pains of it hurting and working through all of that. He went through the process and listened to what the pain his actions had caused. He went through and apologized and said he was sorry, confessed his brokenness in the process, took the time to say, I'm going to be here for you. I'm not going to leave you in this process. And then he left it, and then she came back after doing all that. And she was still hurting. And he said, I did it all. But with cuts, it sometimes happens that they aren't healed just by the simple patch. Sometimes we have to go through the process again. The same thing's true in this case. What he had to do is he had to go through the same process and put it into that place. He had to redress the wound. So he came back. He came back. He listened to her hurt. He went through the process and confessed that he was sorry, assured her that he wasn't going to do it again, and that he was changing his put guidelines in his life to not do it anymore, and basically redressed the issue. Now that took place, and there was healing for a while, and then she came back with the same pain. And he had to redress it again. But sometimes the hurt is so deep that there is that process that goes on for healing, and we can't expect it to be healed instantly. If you would, saying I'm sorry again is to say they want to know, are you genuine about your sorry? Are you still recognizing that this was a big thing, that it caused me pain? An opportunity in the relationship to say, do you hear me, how deep this was? Sometimes in the process of conflict, we don't want to let others go from the pain they've caused us. So we aren't willing to go forward because we're not sure they're really sorry. But that bandaging process, if we carry it through and continue to redress as long as the pain is there until it heals, there's huge benefit in doing that. Once we've handled the relationship, we're in a different concept. You see, when the relationship is damaged, we're not working on the same thing. They're working on something to restore the relationship, and you're working on something to resolve the issue. So you don't get to the end results. But now we can come together that we're in relationship and look at the issue and the problem together and how to resolve that. That changes the whole perspective on how we deal with conflict. Now, there are 4 natural ways of dealing with conflict. If you want to turn over to the back of your page, we have those 4 ways. The world in conflict is different. It's I'm right, you're wrong, I'm strong enough, I win, you lose. That's the world's concept of dealing with conflict. Who's got the biggest bomb? Who's got the most power, the greatest military, so that we can win this conflict, and the way that we win is by might. The golden rule conflict is opposite. It's saying, I only win when you win too. I only win when you win too. Now, I pause to say, it changes everything if the person you're in conflict with knows that you're working for their win. Did you catch that? They have to know that you're not just trying to defend yourself and get your way and have things happen your way, that you're looking for a solution that not only gets what you want, but also meets their needs and gives them a win as well. Because when that happens, no longer do they have to just stand up for themselves and try to make the thing so that it comes their way so they win and you lose. It's now a different perspective. We're both working to figure out a way that we can both win. In looking at that, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourself. See, that golden rule concept of creating a win-win is actually about valuing others as much as yourself. It's opposite of the world's standpoint that says, get for yourself. And so when we approach problems, we often look at them of how I'm going to get the win, and we figure out the strategy for how that to happen, rather than looking at a way that we can reach a win-win situation. James 4 says, you lust and do not have, so you commit murder, and you are envious and cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. You do not have because you do not ask. What is the source of quarrels and conflicts among you? Is it not the source of your lusts that wage war in your members? Aren't the conflicts due to your own selfishness? Isn't that the real heart of the issue? If we look at this sheet that we have here, there are basically 2 axes that go here. And these help us to look for, this axis talks about goals. This side is little concern for the goals. This side is high concern for the goals. This axis is talking about relationships. This is low concern for the relationship. This is high concern for the relationship. So when we're looking then at this area, it has low concern for goals and low concern for relationship. And the way that we do that is I've pictured a turtle. And he's kind of hiding in the bushes. He's a little incognito all himself. When I originally did it, I had him with sunglasses and a little hat to make him even more camouflaged. But people didn't recognize who he was, so I traded it up. In looking at this, the saying is, I leave, I lose. How do turtles handle conflict? They hide. They withdraw, right? If you bring conflict to the turtle, he just pulls in and he waits till you go away. And then he'll take himself and move forward. But he just withdraws from the conflict. That's not always a taught a response. Often that's an innate response. My youngest daughter, we came in and she was doing something that was naughty as a little 1-year-old, and we said, "Honey, what are you doing?" She dropped to the floor, rolled in a ball, and played like she was dead. We said, "Honey, what's going on?" She wouldn't respond. We walked out of the room. She got up and looked around to see if we were still there, and then went on with life. Her way of doing it was being a possum, was being the turtle. She just withdrew from the conflict and figured that that's the best way out. I leave, I lose. And that picture of conflict is to say, by withdrawing, I don't have to deal with it. But neither do I increase the relationship or the problems between the relationship. If I'm not concerned with the issue and not concerned with the relationship, the way that I handle it is just to not participate. If you want to see in the Bible where that happens, when you look at the story of Eli, who was the priest in Israel, his son Hophni and Phinehas ended up working and doing things that were totally against God as priests under the high priest. And what took place is they were sexually immoral with women of the gate, and they stole from the sacrifices that were dedicated to God. And it was so apparent that they were living outside of God's plan that the issue grew to the extent that the elders came and told Eli about his sons. And Eli's way was, he scolded them. Shame, shame, shouldn't do that. But Eli didn't perform the role that he should have. He just ignored them. He scolded them, but didn't stop them. He passively participated even by eating some of the sacrifices that they stole. He didn't correct by removing them from office or giving them punishment. Basically, Eli just pulled in his shell. And because of that, 1 Samuel 2:29 says, "Why do you honor your sons more than me? The time is coming when I will cut short your strength and the strength of your priestly house so that no one in it will reach old age." It was a result of him withdrawing from dealing with conflict. It's not the plan. It may be our natural way of dealing with it. Some of us will avoid conflict at almost any cost. And I will say that we'll talk a little bit later about what happens when the turtle meets and pairs up with somebody else who has a different temperament and how that works. So the first is I leave, I lose. That is no way. None of us get our way because I'm not going to participate, and that means you can't get your way. So I just withdraw. So what does the turtle do? He hides. That's how he deals with it. He hides in conflict. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand if you're a hider, because hiders don't want to admit it anyway, right? They want to keep out of the limelight. The second way of handling conflict is one that has little concern for the relationship and high concern for the goal. They want to get their goal, and they don't care what it does in the relationship. That's the skunk. How do skunks handle conflict? Say again? They spray. I call that hurling, right? So it fits with all these H's we're going to use. They hide. Skunks hurl. And they hurl at the extent that they need. They do it instinctively. I thought you'd like that. When he's threatened, he uses guilt, he uses arguing, he uses discrediting, he uses recruiting reinforcements, he uses law or rules to intimidate, he yells, he throws things, resort to the physical violence. What happens is he starts at this level, and he might use slight manipulation like, it would really hurt me if you didn't agree with what I'm saying. And then, it could cost a lot in our relationship. In fact, you might not be able to continue your work if it keeps going like this. What will happen when I tell your dad and your friends what's going on? And then the voice escalates just a little bit. And then it turns to anger. And then the anger, if that doesn't get it at that level, then they increase the anger until they get what they want. Virtually no level is too high if they aren't able to achieve their goal. Because you see, the relationship is less important than achieving their goal. The relationship is less important than achieving their goal. And sometimes the way they do it, and they do this, you can see them do this in almost any conflict, is I'll take my marbles and go home. In an adult way, if I can use that term and this phrase together, in an adult way in churches it works like this. I just won't pay my tithe. I'm going to stop being a deacon unless you do this for me. I'm going to tell other people and destroy your ministry. I'm going to do. In churches, it works in that same way by saying, unless you agree with me, I'm taking my marbles and going home. In a relationship, it might be that way by divorce. If you don't do this, if you don't follow this, if you don't give in, then I'm gone. It's the last straw. Or I'm going to quit my job. I know of a pastor who, when things didn't go his way from the conference, came in and threw down his credentials and said, unless we do something about it, you can have my credentials. I know he did that 3 times. The first 2 times, he got just exactly what he wanted. The third time, he got what they wanted. He was fired. Said, okay, we'll take your credentials. Sometimes that process, they call their bluff. I'll stop tithing, I'll stop doing it. In Scripture, you find Naboth's vineyard. Ahab comes through, and he sees this awesome vineyard, and he decides that it's for him, and he tries to make a proposal to get it, but it doesn't work. They had sacred thoughts of why that should stay in the family. Jezebel decides she's going to get it for him, and she works out this very detailed plan, and what she does is she in 1 Kings 21 says, proclaim a day of fasting and seat Naboth in a prominent place among the people. But seat 2 scoundrels opposite him and have them bring charges that he has cursed both God and king. Then take him out and put him to death. All over a vineyard that she wanted for her husband. And what takes place is, I'll just mention that God didn't like that plan. In fact, 1 Kings 21, say to him, this is what the Lord says. Have you not murdered a man and seized his property? Then say to him, this is what the Lord says. In the place where the dogs licked up Naboth's blood, dogs will lick up your blood. Yes, yours. And then it takes place. So when we look at that conflict, if it happens at home or church board or any other way, it's a way of maneuvering. And what that's doing is saying, I will do whatever it takes to accomplish my goal. Whether that's political working behind the scenes, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. Let's agree on this together. We'll power it through. Some businesses, some religious organizations work on this pattern. That is, we'll come together, we'll be a powerhouse to get what we want. And then it creates an us versus them project of saying, we'll power together so we can get what we need to have accomplished in order to be against those who are opposing us. But you can see in this case, they've just changed it a little bit to we win and they lose instead of I win and you lose. It's just a twist on the same concept. It's saying relationship isn't the issue for them. They're wanting to accomplish this. And again, sometimes it's not even thought through in that same way. It's just a part of their personality. The next one is the puppy dog. And if you want to picture the puppy dog, it's so obvious how the turtle deals with conflict, and it's very obvious how the skunk deals with conflict. Not so much for the puppy dog. But picture it like this. Picture that you came home and the puppy had torn up the newspaper and your slippers and a few other things, and they were scattered all around the house. And you grabbed that little newspaper and wadded it up, and you said, what have you done? And the puppy responds like this. First, it wets on the floor, and then it squinches down, and even though you have the newspaper raised, it moves toward you. Because the puppy wants the affirmation of the relationship more than the fear of dealing with the issue. just the opposite of the skunk. The puppy wants the relationship over everything else. So the puppy's willing to endure virtually whatever to heal, and that's H-E-E-L, to heal in the relationship, to come in and do anything to restore the relationship no matter what it costs him. Because relationship is more important than issue to him. How are we doing out there? Is it making sense? Natural ways of handling conflict. This is Adam and Eve's story when Adam is presented now with this conflict of following Eve or following God. She took from its fruit and ate, and she gave also to her husband Adam, and he decided that keeping the relationship with her was more important than any loss that he might experience. So he handled the conflict by just giving in to her. He'll sacrifice his opinion, his rights, his self-esteem, his safety, and if necessary, his well-being to keep the relationship. So when we look at conflict, oftentimes we handle it in a way that's natural for us, and that is we're willing to do anything to keep the relationship. Now imagine what happens when you have a puppy dog and the skunk get into a relationship. How do you think that's going to work out? Let's see. Codependency, I think, is the psychological word. Where one is willing to push the other to extent to see how far they can push them and still get what they want, and the other one's willing to comply no matter what level it moves, even to physical abuse. What's going on there? Their way of handling conflict has been processed through this practice. And then the elements are that it could be extreme in how it's ending up in the home. And we often have it work in the same way. There are sometimes institutions or teams that take on the same characteristic of how to handle conflict. And that's true with church congregations too, and groups. In the home, we sometimes are saying, whatever it takes to make Mary happy, we're willing to move the whole family around Mary's happiness. And whatever Mary needs, we're willing to comply so that Mary gets what she wants. It happens in the church when Sister Talks a Lot enters your Sabbath school class and nobody's willing to damage or risk the damage of Sister Talks a Lot's relationship in order to say, you know what, you take up half hour of our 45 minutes every week talking about your stuff. We really need to work on that. But because we have relationship over working with the issue, we're sometimes willing to just pass up the issue altogether, and somebody takes over a board and becomes, because they're bold and powerful, become a person to push it, and all the rest go along with them because they don't want to damage the relationship. Or somebody else isn't even carrying on the things they should be. They're elected as the lay leader for the church, and they think lay is lay activities, right? They just lay down and don't do anything. And they haven't for the last 3 years, but the nominating committee is kind of afraid to maybe take them out of that position because it might hurt their feelings. Sometimes we handle conflict in a way that's natural to us, and it actually increases the issue. The next is in the center there, the half and half, and it's the fox. And I set the fox up, and each of these people kind of have their own background. You know, the skunk has the combat zone, and the turtle has his hideout, and the puppy has the fan club. Here we have the let's make a deal car salesman. And here's how his plan works. I win a lot, you lose a lot. I lose a little, you win a little. And here's my goal as the salesman, is to convince you that you've won a lot and I am the one who really wins. So it works like this. I've got a car for you, and boy, do I have a deal. Now, I know that I'm willing to sell that car for $1,000. But I start at $3,500 or $4,000, and then I let you take me down a few steps. And when you arrive at $2,800, I'm happy. Because I would have sold it to you for $1,000. But I was able to get this deal. And so I just tell you what a good bargainer you are and how well you've done and how good a plan it is. And I've handled it. I've haggled it through the process. And that haggling process is to get to the place that I move it down into the realm that I'm still winning and you aren't aware of how much I'm winning. So in the scheme of things, it looks like 50-50, but it's never more than 60-40. So looking at that prospect, Jacob and Rachel are good examples of how this works. Jacob sees this beautiful woman that he's willing to work for, and Laban is shrewd and has him working for 7 years for her, and secretly, and you could see how it could happen, he disguises her and passes off his oldest daughter instead, and they consummate the relationship only to find out that he got the older daughter, not the younger daughter. And his response is, hey, complete the week of this one, and we'll give you the other one also for service, which you shall serve her just for another 7 years. How's that for a 50-50 deal? We'll work it out, no problem. You know, it's just kind of the way the culture is. By the way, did he communicate that already, that this is what the culture is? No, he doesn't communicate that till after it's taken place. And then he says, see, in our culture, it would be shameful to pass off the older one first to marry the younger one. So that's just why you got the older one. But now if you just work another 7 years, the additional 7 years for Rachel, changing the wages multiple times. Your father cheated me and changed my payment 10 times, yet God didn't let him harm me. God still worked it out. So these 4 ways are the natural 4 ways of handling conflict. Probably you find yourself naturally in one of those ways. We'll come back to them in a minute. There is a God way to handle this. That's not the no way of the turtle, not my way of the skunk, not your way of the puppy dog, and not half my way of the fox, but I win, you win. And I've used turtle doves to kind of represent that, to say that we have a joint plan so that we both achieve in there. And how does that work? By honoring. So if hiding is the turtles, and hurling is the skunks, and healing is the puppy dogs, and haggling is the process of the fox, then honoring is the process of the turtle doves. That is, I'm setting up a plan so that I win and you win too. I have a high concern for the relationship, and I have a high concern to deal with our problems and issues. I'm not going to ignore them or pretend they're not there. We're going to come together to make that work. It's the picture of going through and helping people to process and figure out what is their win? What do they need for a win? That's a part of the process, is to say, what would be a win for you in this conflict? How would you resolve it? How would you feel like things were accomplished? David, the protector of the flocks in his area, decides that at the end of the season, when it comes time for the shearing, that there is an opportunity to collect, right? To collect from them as sort of a way of paying for the protection. And when he does that, Nabal rejects him. David heads to destroy him with 400 men. And Abigail meets him. And Abigail looks for a win-win. Please forgive your servant's presumption. The Lord your God will certainly make a lasting dynasty of my Lord, because you fight the Lord's battles, and no wrongdoing will be found in you as long as you live. Do you hear what she's saying? I know that you want to follow God. She's reminding him of his values and the fact that she doesn't want him to ruin his connection with God by acting for himself in this role and being revengeful. So she comes in to be the conciliator, to bring the two together. And what does she do? She presents a win-win plan that allows her husband to live and David to be spared the blood being on his hands. She gives him gifts. She gives him the food. She takes care of him. And she enters in a win for him, and she saves David's face because she's now presented this opportunity to honor him. So she restores his honor, which is necessary for him. She gives the gifts that he needs, and she stands and apologizes. She does the things on behalf of her husband to bring the gap together. She has the win-win concept in mind. Ephesians 4:15 and 16 says, speaking the truth in love, we're to grow up in all aspects into Christ, who is the head. Let nothing be done from selfish ambition or conceit, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem others better than himself. In mediation for managers, it says, leaders do not avoid, repress, or deny conflict, but rather, once everyone has come to see it that way, they can exchange combative posture for a creative stance because they don't feel threatened, they feel challenged. Naturally, the ways that we handle conflict are based on our personalities. You may not have recognized it. We used different terms because I wanted you to think of the whole conflict process, but they're the same as the temperaments that we've talked about in general. Hiding is the phlegmatic temperament, the withdrawn, quiet to themselves, wanting to avoid conflict. The hurling is the choleric temperament, who comes forward and is pushing to the goal, to the place that people become a secondary item. Healing is the partier who's willing to go with anybody and be a part just for keeping the relationship. And the haggling is the process of the melancholy who's trying to work out a deal and still humanly looks for it to move to him. And honoring, it's any of those temperaments that put God in the center and let God work through them. Honoring is a God-powered way of resolving conflict because it's love. It's putting somebody else before myself. It's making sure that they have a win in this process, rather than this is what I want and I'm pushing to get it. Dealing with the issue is super important and a hard process to come through. If you want, on the front, going back to the other side of your page, it says dealing with the issue. We have just a few steps to help you look at how to deal with the issue. We've talked about the natural temperaments and how they work. We want to give you just a process then of how to deal with the issue. Proverbs 18:13 says, to answer before listening, that's folly and shame. So the first thing we do is listen carefully to the other person. You have to hear what the conflict is. It's a second step to select an appropriate time for each person. First, listening to the other person. It might be that you've assumed what the conflict is when you've missed it altogether. It might be that you have an argument after the meal because you thought that the meal wasn't done correctly. And you say, I can't believe how you acted with that meal, and I felt that it was a negative way of responding. And it's like, oh, you didn't like the meal? Well, it wasn't that so much as I felt your response toward the meal was the problem. Clarifying sometimes helps. Choosing a time. You know how easy it is for somebody to have a bee in their bonnet and come in and want it resolved? And imagine if you've had a hard day or just waking up and you're going through and you're in that relaxed time and somebody comes and they want ready to deal with an issue. And they come in and say, okay, and they unload the issue. And the truth is you're still reading your paper because you weren't ready to pay full attention and give give them the ability to work through that process. So one of the things we look to is to say, let's set a time. We do it this way in our household. We say, okay, I have a problem I'd really like to talk about, or I have something that is bothering me I'd like to talk about. So we say, on a scale from 1 to 5, how big a problem is this? If this is a 5, I'm not quite ready because I've just gone through a whole day worth of problems and I'm not ready to face another problem. So if it's a 5, it would be easy to just say, no, it's a 5, I can't handle it today. But the second step is to say, if it's a 5, the issue is, would it be okay if we wait till our regular table talk time on Sunday? Or could we handle this tomorrow when we're both fresh? What I'm doing is saying, I've heard that you have a problem. I'm not going to ignore your issue. I'm working on the timing for doing that and wanting to see if we can find agreement on when that would happen. Rather than it be a 5 and I superficially handle it and not really think through the steps and mess up the relationship by not handling it correctly. So 2 is selecting a time. Defining the conflict is also important. It's easy to think that the problem is somebody else's. Defining the conflict can be like this. We had this problem because we took my wife's car in. My wife's car had, a little blue bomb, we called it the blue bonnet, but it had some problems. So we took it in, and then we took it in on Monday morning, and then Monday night, I went in to kiss her and say, honey, I'll see you later, I'm going to my meeting. And she says, what do you mean? I have a meeting tonight. Oh, well, she says, I don't have a car for my meeting tonight. Oh, well, my meeting's in 15 minutes and it's the other direction and yours is that way. And here's how it could have gone from that place. That's always how it happens with you. You're always thinking of you. You never think about me. It's like you think your job's more important than my job. It's like you think your agenda is more important than my job. Well, if you take care of your own car, then I wouldn't have to do that. You could just handle taking care of it. I'm the one who's taking care of your car. That's right. It is your fault. You took care of the car and put it into the shop, realizing that I needed it tonight. You're just like your mother. You're always bringing up things that are problems, one after the other, loading them on one after the other after the other. Next thing you know, we're going to be talking about the dog. What do you mean the dog? Well, you know how the dog works. The dog's always causing problems all over the house. You're the one who wanted the dog. And pretty soon it's like, how did we get in this fight and what is it about? What happens is defining the conflict helps to really look at it and helps to separate it. So in this case, when the conflict's there, it would be easy to say, whose fault is it? And in that case, when you try to establish fault, it often becomes defensive for both people trying to put the fault on the other. How different would it be if we started by saying, the conflict isn't that you didn't think about me. The conflict isn't that you've done this before. The conflict isn't you didn't ask me about whether I needed the car. The conflict is we don't have 2 cars and we usually do. Suddenly it changes, right? No longer a relational issue. Now we're dealing with an actual issue. Now in that relationship aspect, we can work together and defining the conflict, not my fault or your fault, but in another way, maybe even saying, you know, what I recognize is we didn't communicate like we needed to. Now, does that make it my fault or your fault? You know, I could identify my own contribution. Are you following the sheets? I can identify my own contribution by saying, I could have thought about that and I should have. It just slipped my mind. Or when the car went in, I should have thought that you might need the car as well. I'm sorry, I should have communicated that. Well, I had the same responsibility. I could have said, well, I have to take the meeting. Now all of a sudden, by taking your part in the contribution, the other person now looks, instead of it trying to assign what you did wrong, they're able to look at their own part in the conflict and identify that and say, Yeah, it was probably partially me too. I was quick to jump on it because I was afraid that I would miss my meeting. After working through those elements of defining the conflict, now you're able to search for solutions. We call that process of brainstorming the same way you would for any other problem. And this is literally what we did in that conflict. Well, I could ride a bicycle. It's at night, but I could still ride a bicycle. Well, you could catch a ride with somebody else. We could actually go together and one of us go early or call a friend and have them take us. You know, we could call a cab, and that brainstorming can go any way it wants. Believe it or not, we actually called a cab, because at that point when we talked, we said, you know, cab sounds like a fun thing. I kind of think I've never really ridden in a cab before. I think it'd be kind of fun to do. It wouldn't be that much to ride, and then afterwards you could pick us up. We could pick each other up. That'd be great. So deciding on the best win-win situation. See, the goal now is not who gets the car. The goal is how do we get both people to their meetings. That's a win-win for each of us. Do you see the difference? Win-win for each of us is not saying who's got the most important job, who wins, why is it so important, who is the responsible one. Instead, we're saying how do both people get their win that's for them, and how do we accomplish that? And instead of working on defending myself or getting for myself, I'm working on what can take place to help accomplish their win. And it's not complete until we look for a way to accomplish a win for both parties. After running through all of those elements, then we evaluate the solution and say, first we say, this is the solution we want. And then we come back and I say, write it down. Write down the solution. Here's why. It may not be so big in an area like this. It may not be so big in an area like this, but it can if let's say your discussion on working through an issue is how to deal with the discipline for the kids. And when you leave, one of you thinks that somebody should be taking care of pointing out to the kids their problems and dealing with it, but you haven't actually decided who it is. And you both assumed it was the other person. So like in this one saying, okay, well, we could catch a cab. Yeah, let's catch a cab. Well, I thought you were going to call the cab. And I thought I was going to call the cab. So who was really there? So if I write it down, when I go to write it down, it gives me the opportunity to clarify between us what's really happening. Well, when we say we're supposed to put the kids down at 8:30, who's supposed to put the kids down at 8:30? Whose job is that? And are we agreeing? Do we trade off in doing that? By writing down the solution, we end up clarifying points of how to put that into practice. And by using this on small problems, we're able to then move and approach the larger problems later. It's an ongoing process. Then we evaluate the solution. If our solution was, for example, working with children and how to deal with our children, we evaluate how did it go. We decided that the way we're going to handle that, our child is always forcing the issue for bedtime to say that she's going to stay up even when we put her down. How are we going to handle that? And we decided that we're going to do it by setting a time and putting her down and just letting her cry it out until she gets ready. But now it's 2 days later and we're saying, she just keeps crying, and I don't think I could handle that. So we can evaluate how that's working for us and how that is, and do we need to change it and work on it from a different standpoint? It doesn't mean that once we've reached a solution, that solution will be the same for all time. We have an opportunity to evaluate it and work it through. And by using that as a process that we come back and evaluate, especially rules that we make as part of the household, it gives the opportunity to come and revise that. That's the process. What we want to go to is fair fighting rules, and they're at the bottom of your page. We use I messages, not you messages, because I messages help move my response to your actions. That's saying not that your actions were wrong or assuming the motive for your actions. It's just saying when you do this, this is how I feel. An example. You make me mad every time that you come in and muddy the shoes up all the way and don't even pay attention to the fact that I vacuumed the floor and cleaned the whole place up, and you just ignore me altogether. You're so inconsiderate. You aren't thinking about anybody besides yourself. It's different than, I feel really hurt when you come in the house and walk through on the carpet and it gets mud all over after I've just put in the time to clean it. It makes me feel like you don't value the work that I'm doing, and as if there's no reason for me to do it if it's going to continue in that process. Difference between I message and you message. I message is communicating how I'm feeling about your actions and what it does inside of me. You message is often assuming motivations and reasons behind you and assigning fault to you. How do you think you'll respond to you message as opposed to I message? You messages have ability to bring up confrontation, defensiveness in how we approached it. A pattern for I message is how you felt. I feel angry. At what? What was your feeling about? About the way you spoke to me. Why? Why you feel this way? Because I was embarrassed and it was in front of my friends. And instead, I would prefer that we discuss these things in private, or that you didn't put me down, or what you think is a joke would not come across to the friends because I feel it still was putting me down. All of those are ways to address an I message. A second rule for fighting fair is don't yell, scream, or escalate. That is, it's easy to start with this tone of voice, and by the time they respond, and they respond just a little abruptly, that you're now escalating to help get your point across. And you can see people who actually just are yelling at each other, neither one of them listening, just exchanging anger. We don't yell, scream, or escalate. By doing that, it gives us ability to process and think and not let our emotions run the day. No backlogging, bringing up past issues. If you're backlogging, does everyone know what backlogging is? Raise your hand if you know what backlogging is. Okay, almost everybody. Backlogging, when we're taking issues from the past and yanking them into this present fight, discussion, then that's backlogging. Why that's wrong is that, one, if we're bringing it up, it's because we haven't received a win-win. Otherwise, why would we bring it up? And if we haven't processed it to get a win-win, then really what's going on is you're keeping count. You're tallying how things are going and saying, oh, I lost this one, so I have the right to get a point to get a better response on this one. Backlogging means that the issue wasn't resolved correctly earlier. And what it does give you is the opportunity to say, okay, in that discussion, how do you deal with it if somebody does backlog? How do you deal with it if somebody uses you messages instead of I? First, you can just say, could you just share with me instead of my actions how you felt by that response? That gives them a chance to put it in you messages. If they deal with the escalating and screaming, the Bible says a soft answer turns away wrath. You could say, I'm so sorry you felt that way. And suddenly, it just drains out the anger. It's hard to be angry at somebody who's being kind back to you. A third response to backlogging is to say, I hear in what you shared with me that there was an issue in how we handled that problem in the past. We'll have to come back to that and reprocess it because it's obvious that you still feel that we didn't achieve a win-win with that. So let's do that, but let's put that on the back burner till we can process because we can't handle both issues at the same time. So we separate those and then we can come back to that at another time. Love doesn't keep a record of wrongs. In looking at 4, it says, give opportunity for processing, and it's usually the men who need the opportunity for processing. I have read several books on the whole process of how to interact, and one of them that was most impactful to me is that men are clams and women are crowbars. That was the title of the book. And what it was saying is that what happens is women are trying to find the information that the guys are holding in, and when they press them, they just get tighter and tighter and tighter. And so what they do is they get a crowbar to try to get in there and figure out what's going on with this guy. I would say that sometimes that could be the result of not giving them an opportunity to process. What it means is, I say, let them ride their little train. So if you come to them, if we have talked before, and we'll talk about it in the night we deal with communication, that's tomorrow night, where we're going to be dealing with intimacy and how to grow closer in communication. You'll find that men speak much fewer words in a day on average than women. That means our vocabulary is less, and we run out of those words about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. We're done with our word count. You know, we've done what we've done, and we've said what we're going to say, and it's harder for us to process. So what happens is when somebody is in a place and they're asking questions, men are slower in the processing of how to verbally share what's going on inside. So by that, you can imagine how that works when somebody comes and says, okay, so how did you feel when you did that? No, come on, tell me how you feel. Well, if you're not going to tell me how you feel, how are we going to complete this? You must have felt angry. Did you feel hurt? Were you content? And it just keeps coming, and it keeps coming, and they get a little further closed and further closed and further closed. What they need to do is say, could you think about how you feel? And then if you look at them and they're still that deer in the headlights blank look, then say, why don't you go ahead and ride your train and come back when you're ready? Let them take their little train down and think about it and process it and work as best as we men can, and then come back and share, yeah, I was angry. Tomorrow, I'm going to be giving you a set of words that help for men to look at communication, because we often don't have the verbiage that you do. Just like when we see colors, we see red, yellow, green. We don't see chartreuse, magenta. Those aren't even in our color range. We don't process in the same way. So when it comes to emotions, we have an opportunity to look at emotions in their areas and be able to say, my basic thing is I felt sad. Oh, good. Was that depressed? Was that discouraged? And so there's a list of words that help share sad feelings, so you can look at them and say, oh yeah, that's how I felt. It helps to process in that way. So giving the opportunity to process will give them a chance to think it through and come back and be able to verbally respond before they're hit with a barrage of questions that they stack up to the place that they don't feel that they can communicate, because we're like still on question 1 and you're on 32, and we don't think we could ever get to that point for another 3 days. Avoid generalizing with never and always. Here's what happens. You always, and immediately I'm thinking of, I know there's a time when I didn't. You never give me flowers. I remember 2 years ago on Mother's Day, I gave you flowers. And that's all I can think of is the exceptions to what you've said, to the place that what you're telling me doesn't register. Now, if you say, I can see that there's a pattern that's developing in that you're not seeming to respond to me to show me love. Oh. But if you say, you never take any time, I will stop and list all the ways I can think of that I've tried to show you love, and you just ignored it. And you haven't communicated because of the words that we use. If we attack the person rather than address their behavior, then we tell that person that 1, we don't value them, 2, we don't think they can change, and 3, that we feel that there is a problem based on who they are, not what they've done. So addressing a behavioral thing to say, you're a liar. You've said that you always come across these crazy stories, and you lie. Instead of saying, what you said doesn't seem truth to me, I've now put you in the role of being a liar, a pattern, a person that you are, rather than an action that you took. Accept their stated motives. You know how hard it is when when somebody shares with you something that really is not your motive, they say, you know what, you walked right past me and you snubbed me. I am so tired of being ignored. What am I doing wrong? It's like, oh, I was just processing. I was totally, I don't feel that way at all toward you. It's just I wasn't paying attention. Oh no, I know that that's been there. I could tell in your face that you really have been ignoring me. Now what do? How do you defend what your real motive is when it wasn't what they've assumed and they won't let you change it in any way because they've decided that that's what the motive was? I know that how the evidence stacks up, but let me share with you that's really not what was going on in my heart. We have to accept people's definition of what's going on in their heart because we don't know. True? So as we've gone through tonight, if you take these sheets, what I do in marriage counseling or pre-marriage counseling is we take these sheets and we ask couples to work through a small problem on a scale on a 2 instead of a 5, so they can get the pattern of how to work through a problem and then be able to do that in a way that they learn that process, and pretty soon the process becomes natural. You learn to separate the relationship and make sure the relationship is on track with the other person, and then you can work together on the problem. You know, you can come off of this by saying, we've handled some doozies of problems as a couple, and we've been able to be on the other side together, and it makes us feel so secure in knowing that whatever happens tomorrow, we have a process for how we're going to deal with it. We're together. What's your take on what we've covered tonight? What kinds of things do you see for yourself? What kinds of questions do you have? Let's have an opportunity to see how it worked for you. How many of you want to say what your normal way of handling conflict is? I'll ask it this way. How many of you are married to a skunk? No, I won't say it. But you know you could list those people, right? You could list them right away, who they were, who you've dealt with in that way. What are some of the ways that you see this process? How could it help you? Please, Damon. Okay, good. And he's saying, I think that when I realized that their reasoning or motive behind it really wasn't what I assumed it is a big step. What about for the others of you? What kinds of steps were valuable for you?
Here you go, Rich.
Please, Richie.
When my wife says we never go any place, we never do anything anymore.
And you say, we went to the grocery store yesterday, right?
What I do is I get out my little calendar and we block out. I say, we need to block out some time, and we just write it down, and it's, that time is sacred then. And so then we go on the trip or do whatever. But the point is, right at the moment, we lock that time in.
That's nice. I thought you were going to say you looked at your calendar and made a list of all the times you had gone places. So I appreciated the way that you took it. Who else? Something that helped you in the process of what we talked about tonight. Or questions on how to apply it. Please, Gina.
I have found with marriage number 1, I was a total turtle.
Okay.
Marriage number 2, I can express my opinions and not worry that I'll be deserted or something.
Awesome.
So
yeah.
You can change.
Yes, and that's good. And sometimes, most often in relationships, over time, I've had people come and share with me, I don't know what happened. Suddenly, out of nowhere, my wife has just gone crazy in how she's handling things. And as we sorted through, what happened is she was a turtle, and she was handling conflict as a turtle for a long time, and then she was fed up and she became a snapping turtle. And she came out of that as saying, I'm done with handling things this way. I want to make this thing work. And it's like, he's totally, how did that happen? Where did she come from? Yeah, there's advantage to learning different styles. Who else has something to share? Please, right here first. He said, I'm going to leave my boots outside before I come into the house. What do you think are the topics that are for married couples? What do you think are the topics that are the most signal conflicts? Just shout them out. Money. Raising kids. What was that? I didn't. Oh, sexuality. What else? Communication. How you deal with the in-laws and outlaws. That whole prospect. Often conflict is in the give and take of the relationship. What other areas did you gain from as we talk tonight? We're going to have the opportunity to look at some review of some text for tonight and then our drawing.
So Matthew 6:21 says, "For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also."
I treasure my wife. Luke 6:38 says, "Give and it will be given to you, good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, will be put into your lap. For with the measure that you use, it will be measured back to you."
Malachi 3:10, "Bring ye all the tithes into the storehouse, that there may be meat in mine house. And prove me now herewith, said the Lord of hosts, if I will not open you the windows of heaven and pour you out a blessing, that there shall not be room enough to receive it."
And Matthew 6:24 says, "No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money."
And 2 Corinthians 9:7 says, "Each one must give as he has decided in his heart, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver."
Very good. And our drawing tonight is Mike. Let's give Mike a hand. Thank you. Tomorrow morning we're going to be talking about forgive as you've been forgiven. And tomorrow night we're going to be intentionally deeper talking about communication. Do you know that there are different levels of communication? Do you know that the average couple doesn't get to the last two levels of communication, that it's missed? We'll talk about how to move through those levels of communication and how to build a more intimate relationship. Good night. Thanks. God bless.